right. So my name is Frank Lavinia, and to my right is Candace Cooley, and we're going to talk about quantum computing. Surprise, surprise. Of course, the name of the stream it literally is like Friday Quantum Roundup. So I kind of gave it away there, and it's been a busy week, hasn't it?
Yes, it's been a very busy week, between conferences that someone went to and speaking with potential guests for the show. I mean, and the news that's come out, just everything is popping all over the place. But
It's been pretty wild, hasn't it?
it really has. And I'm so excited to talk about the show,
So
about the conference.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So this was my first ever quantum computing conference, and I did manage to sneak into the keynote. But the thing I want people to realize is like there's largely the standing room only, right? Obviously, okay, now I see that there's a couple of seats there, but when I was there, it was standing room only, and it was interesting. I did a couple of live streams there. I had my phone, I had my like selfie stick. But I did notice that a couple of things we're gonna, I think, would be a good theme for the day. But here's a couple of things that I spent most of my time networking in the hallway, which is where the most interesting stuff always is.
Hmm. Hmm.
And let's see, is this gonna let me go forward and backward? There we go. So this is a shout out to Illinois. I think that for those who don't know, I spoke at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. Um, um, Coordinated Services Laboratory, which is a famous um, place for computer science, right? Ilianac, I think, was the first computer that they built there. It was during the war or shortly after World War II. And fun fact, it's also where HAL 9000 was built. He was built there. Yeah, which was really cool to kind of be in the birthplace of one of the most infamous AIs in cinematic history. I did do a couple of, I did a walkthrough, but this did not make it to my kind of walkthrough live stream. This looks like connectors for a quantum computer, so it was really my first chance to kind of see it live in person. If anyone within the sound of my voice, though, has access to a lab, or you're looking for folks to do a video segment on, you know where to find us. Just saying. You have family in Westchester County, not too far from the IBM
Yes,
um,
yes, absolutely.
lab. I am a full time employee of Red Hat, so hey, I'm already kind of like we can make it happen. Just
Absolutely. And
putting that out there into the universe.
I'm driving distance from McGill,
Mm-hmm.
where you can't even throw a stick and not hit a physicist.
Yep.
So absolutely get in contact with us. We'd love to have you on the show. And that's well, that's something I want to talk about later, but what I want to talk about now is that you were telling me about the vibe of the conference.
Yeah. So the
And
vibe of the conference was interesting. Sorry, I cut you off.
it's okay, go ahead.
Um, the vibe of the conference was interesting, right? You and I both been to a lot of tech conferences, right? From the community led, code camps and user groups and to the big Microsoft conferences like Build, right?
Right?
Shout out to Jeff because I think Jeff is going to have a pretty big role in this year's Build. We're not going to spoil it, but
Right. Yeah, shout out. Absolutely.
it's
It's gonna be big. He deserves it.
one of the.
And it's very exciting.
It's always great to see one of the good guys kind of like get the moment in the sun. We're not going to spoil it, but like if you're going to be watching, you should watch because it's pretty cool and be like, I know that guy.
Right.
Um, but the vibe is not your typical tech conference. In fact, when you kind of um, look at the looks I got when I was walking around with the selfie stick and like with it was kind of you can almost I could feel like people felt uneasy, which is kind of funny at a conference, right?
Right,
And
because they're there for a purpose to mingle with
mhm,
other people that are in the same sector
right.
that want to mingle, like
And I had a press pass. I had a press badge.
right.
I just find it interesting that, if you did that, I mean, honestly, like last time I was at Build was Build 2016. Everybody had some kind of social media thing going on, live streams, right? Um, the So it would not have seemed out of place, put it that way. You know what I mean? Whereas I
Yeah.
felt out of place. I think that a lot of that has to do with, and I spoke to some of the people there. I'm looking for my oh, let me show you. Totally unprofessional for me to go off camera, but I have a purpose.
I was just gonna say also, like, it's not like it's a developer conference where there's all these developers who are
Right.
trying to find themselves jobs. It's not that kind of event. It's still very much academia.
Very heavy academic vibe. Although I will say for the folks that organized Quantum Tech USA, it did a pretty good job of blending the two worlds,
Right.
right? Um,
Well, that's what has to happen, especially in
right,
quantum,
right.
right? Like,
Exactly. And
no
like,
one no one gets to be the gatekeeper. And
well, no one should be the gatekeeper, but
well, no one
yeah,
should be, right? And, I mean, obviously, there are those that,
right.
that are trying to set that up, and
Mhm.
that's something I think that just from the very beginning, we should just stand against and say, "No," because we need the collaboration in order to push us forward.
Well,
There's
I mean, if
so many people doing different things at the same time.
gatekeeping is counterproductive,
Yes.
right? Especially, obviously, to the ones that are being kept out, but ironically, to the gatekeepers themselves, right? So you and I were talking about this on my drive back from DC, which beltway traffic being what it was. I had plenty of time to kind of think and talk out kind of the experience, but you know, it brought me back to my early days at data science and AI conferences, right? Where, you know, there was definitely a sense of the mathematicians in the crowd or the PhD level mathematicians in the crowd definitely felt like, hey, there's a whole new group of people moving in that may not have earned their place, as it were.
Okay.
And I would always get death stares because I would speak at one of these things, and I said, like, you don't. It was actually one of the Pi Data conferences where I spoke, and it was at the Capital One massive campus in Tyson's Corner, Virginia.
Okay.
And I'll never forget. Uh, I was in the speaker's room, and there was a gentleman in tweed, and this was like July in DC. So if you're wearing tweed in July in DC,
You're a
you're
serious
committed. You're
guy.
committed to the cause. And
Right.
and this guy, I think he got his PhD or whatever in Oxford, so he had a very proper kind of Indian slash British accent type thing going on, and in full on tweed and sipping tea with pinky up and all that. And we were talking to ourselves, and then he turned to me, and I was like, I'm an industry, I do this, I do that, and I lead the practice for this company. And he just sips his tea without missing a beat. I'm so glad they're letting practitioners like you into these events now.
Ooh.
Which was like, I think he meant it as a compliment.
It was a little hoity-toity, right?
Oh, yeah, I mean, it
But
was very clearly like,
you
kind of like
plebeians
the
can
the
come
the, the
forth.
subtitle the subtitle would have been like, oh, so they're letting the help speak now.
Right, right. Yeah, exactly. Very
um
upstairs, downstairs. But
and that was like 2015, 2017 actually, so not that long ago, right?
right,
And honestly, like, clearly the guy is smart, clearly the guy is committed to academia by wearing tweed in in DC area in the summer. And for those of you that don't get the reference, it's extremely humid and hot.
exactly.
But I, I don't know where he is now. I don't know what he's doing now. But when I would speak at events, I'd say, like, you don't need to have a PhD in mathematics to do this, or an advanced degree in statistics to do this. I would get death stares, and I would know exactly who in the room does have a PhD.
Right.
And I would kind of walk it back, and I said, and if you do have a PhD, this means you're going to be the chief data officer, the chief AI officer, the chief whatever officer, the startup founder, the startup co-founder, the the billionaire, right? Or multimillionaire, right? Like you have an advantage now that more people are interested in this. And I think a good analogy would be, if there's a local band that from your neighborhood, a rap group from your neighborhood, and they suddenly strike it big, some people feel alienated because all these new fans come in, but also you were there in the beginning. You knew them before they were famous, type of thing. And I
Right.
think that for the gatekeepers trying to being astonished that the help was now let into the speaker room, you know, there's so much more opportunity for mathematicians and PhD level statisticians that wasn't around 10 years
Oh,
ago.
absolutely. It's not that
Right.
if you're just good in math, then you get to be a math teacher. No,
Right.
no, no. Like, if you're good in math, you're going to be incredibly wealthy,
Yes.
incredibly
Yeah.
wealthy on like a next level
Right.
because of your math ability. For the different types of for what's different types of technology they're coming down the road. I mean, if you can work on algorithms, like I told you, like I remember my father was always walking around with this he was always walking around with graph paper, right?
Hmm.
And he just would be sitting there like in the car, like come to a stop, and then he just like write an algorithm that he had been
Nice.
working on. Like, you know, crazy stuff that no one really understood at the time, except for the men that he was working in IBM with, right? But
Right.
yeah, math is an incredible ability that people do not put. They should put so much attention into it, and they should figure out honestly if the kids are not adapting to the math curriculum, then they need to think about how they're teaching the curriculum.
Well, I mean, I think I'm a good poster child for that because I hated math when I was in up until high school, up until sophomore year of high school. I was terrible at it and I hated it. Right now, I like to think I'm good at it now, and I know I enjoy it. Right. Um, but clearly, I wouldn't say I'm the same person because that opens up some philosophical things, right? But same brain, more or less, right? So what went wrong there? Like, why did I hate it? Right? Clearly, something went wrong, and then it wasn't until I kind of back end discovered it later on. And most of it was because actually, I still have this on my desk from our stream the other week, right? Because I had to program my own games. I, you know,
Right, that's right.
I had to learn all this, right? Like, and
Right.
this is a great example of, there's a waveform there, sine and cosine, right?
Hmm.
By chance or by circumstances or by fate, whatever, I knew what those meant. I knew what those were used for, right? It wasn't a strange concept for me, right? Whereas, like, so when I finally did that in school that year, trigonometry, it kind of something clicked
Okay.
and it worked. And it really, so I mean, to say that, I mean, you're right. Like the way math is taught in our society is just awful. Right now, I'm very blessed. Both my kids who are in school age are very good at it, and I don't often share that I hated it when I was their age. So,
Right.
um, but but I mean, to the point where, and if somebody wants to stay in academia, there's still opportunities there too, right? There's going to be a lot more funding
Absolutely.
for quantum data science and AI
For
research
the
now.
curriculums how they teach it in
Right.
school, what the access of the information they have now.
Right.
In fact, you had mentioned this, I didn't wanna forget.
Hmm.
You ran into an author.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. So that's actually why I got off the screen. So I actually had a great conversation with Alex. He's going to be on a forthcoming show.
Yes.
Probably the next one released. Um,
Maybe next week?
Hold on, my wife, of course, knows that I don't know. She wants to figure it out. 1 second.
But he was so interesting and such a gentleman, and he has an academic background. At the same time, he's understanding the commercial side of quantum computing and
Hmm.
how it can apply. Oh, you're so it's great to see
Yeah,
someone, for example, that recognizes that there's a bridge, but is also willing to walk on the bridge
and
to
and and to build the bridges, right? And like
right.
he's a super nice guy, by the way, and he actually did sign the book, which I thought was cool. Let me see if I can find the. Like, so I thought that was cool, right? And you know, it the I really should put the Alexa in do not disturb mode. um, no, but we had a great conversation, and he talked about this, kind of indirectly, like the gatekeeping, like but if you're in academia and you see this as a threat, I encourage you to stop and realize that there's going to be, as industry evolves, commercial side of this evolves, there's going to be a lot more money, obviously, in industry, but also a lot of that's going to end up in academia and research, right?
Mhm, mhm.
Look at the AI research labs, what's happened to them in the last 10, 15 years, right? They went from kind of being, Jan LeCun, who was at NYU, right? Kind of had like a back room somewhere around Washington Square Park, to, I think now they have the state of the state of the art, one of the state of the art labs in the New York City area, right? That came from industry money, because that also came from this, it's a much more robust field now.
And to that note,
Hmm.
there are a lot of companies that are on the commercial side
Hmm.
that are aligning themselves with university research,
Absolutely.
and they're coming closer and closer together because, the commercial side need the PhDs to validate the work that they're doing.
And a lot of the universities, a lot of the big tech companies have done that, like, for decades, not just in the last 10 years. I know Microsoft and the University of Washington have had a tight relationship, since forever. IBM has a pretty tight relationship with a number of cutting edge universities. All my professors were all ex IBM people,
Okay,
right? Because my school wasn't that far from Westchester County.
exactly.
So I think that it's a mistake to view them as industry and academia as necessarily at odds.
Right.
I think it's normal because they are separate spheres with separate rules and things like that, but they don't have to be adversarial. I think that's really what I'm trying to say.
Right. And I think that what's happening is, commercial, they want to come out with new information. They want to tell people what they're doing, um, because it's a very exciting time.
Hmm.
And, obviously, it's not happening tomorrow.
No,
Um, but uh, working with academia to prove that their concepts work. And there's just so many different kinds of quantum computing companies out there. I mean, you have software companies, you have hardware companies, you have hybrid of both. Um, we just thinking about all the people that we've spoken to already. It's just every
absolutely.
time we dip into this, we dip into something new.
No, absolutely. And I think um, it's an exciting field and time to be in, because it's just, if you know, I'm too young to be part of the transistor revolution from tubes to transistors and kind of the semiconductor industry. But the timing on this one could potentially be very big. And again, a lot of this is around timing, right? You have some people saying it's imminent, some people saying it's 5 years, some people saying it's closer to 20, right? I personally think that, what was the stat you were telling me in the virtual green room? Something about some ridiculous amount of money by 2030.
Oh,
Right.
right. Market
Hmm.
growth and investment trends. Okay. According to a recent report, which was Global Newswire, the quantum computing market is projected to reach 7.48 billion by 2030. The growth is driven by the success of hybrid quantum classical computing solutions, particularly in fields like cryptography and complex simulations. So, the trick to it happening sooner is to go hybrid,
Hmm.
because, you've got to work with existing what you have. Um, it's just a faster way. But again, I really think that, there could be companies that are doing something like this, and it could be happening within, 5 years.
I mean, and
You know, it
twenty
depends
thirty is
on
only 5 years away. Actually, kind of less than 5 years, 4.5 years away.
actually, that's a good point.
So
That upsets
it
me
is
because
it
I
is
need a
kind of
moment.
upsetting for a number of
I need a
reasons.
moment.
Um,
Um, but yeah, I mean, so it's going to happen.
right.
Um, and the companies that are closer are doing hybrid, or they're doing, like, remember we talked to Hedo
Yep.
Match, and Hedo Match came up with an algorithm that they're using for a dating match. That was such a great
That really was
conversation.
a great show.
I'm gonna have Anna White back, but so that's happening right
Right.
now.
And they have a dating app. There's another thing that they're working on. Well, she did mention it on the show, like a travel app, basically. That
Exactly, there's
it's
a
gonna
travel app that they're
be
talking
based
about.
on
So
quantum algorithms. So like this is not that far away. And honestly, I'm not surprised that hybrid is really gonna come first because where things really start happening is when, you know, um where the rubber meets the road, right? It's gonna be
right.
hybrid, right? Because at some point these things
Mhm,
have
mhm,
to connect with existing systems, right? They're
right,
not going to exist in a vacuum. It's not going to be like you had the mainframes back in the day. You had the mainframes, and then you had a separate kind of client server slash PC architecture that kind of were largely separate with a couple of interconnections. I think because of the data heavy nature and the compute heavy nature, the data heavy nature of enterprises today, and the compute heavy advantages you get on top of quantum, they're 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 going to have to be hybrid, right? And if you look at like who, what where did the first kind of lower emission cars start out as? They were hybrids, right?
right. It's
And
true.
because there's already an existing infrastructure for conventional computing, there's a number of data center kind of operators and manufacturers and the whole ecosystem there that I don't think I think that there eventually will be a something of a parallel ecosystem for just quantum, but the first go commercially are probably going to be hybrid systems, right? The ones that, how do you rack and stack your quantum computer, right? How do you, how do you plug it in? How do you maintain it? Who's going to get paged when the system goes down, right? The mundane day two operation stuff. And I lost Candace. So hopefully she'll rejoin and add her to the stream. There you go. You're back.
I'm
Your
back.
audio's not back. Now your audio's back.
Okay, thank you.
See, folks, we are doing this live.
Right, right.
Um, but no, those types of day two operation stuff, it's not flashy, right? But it has to get done. Those are going to need to be done, and it's probably going to be something like a hybrid environment.
I think it has to be. It also has to be compact.
Yep.
Um, I think that that's an important thing. Actually, this brought me to um, something came out this week. Um, something came out. I want to. It talks about um, compacting the photons. And because you're compacting the photons and doing it in such a small space, it
Hmm.
actually is now changing the idea of entanglement for,
Interesting.
yes. So I was like, and I was talking to someone today who's on the academic side.
Hmm.
And I said, is this brand new? Like, it came out this week, like, what's going on? And he's like, well, it's not new, but it is something that is real. And I'm like, okay, so what does this mean? He goes, it changes entanglement. And I said, well, explain that a little bit more. And then he said, basically, it's not something that is conventional, to the way that people are dealing with entanglement. And it's like a new idea in the whole scope of everything that's going on. Here, let me find something here. Um, okay,
So,
it's coming out of Israel, I believe. Um, I apologize. I started talking about it, and then all of a sudden I'm trying
that's
to
okay.
find. Okay,
While
here we
you're
go.
doing that, okay, you got it.
Researchers at Tech Neon, okay, Israel Institute of Technology, have discovered a new form of quantum entanglement involving near field photons, with total angular momentum. This advancement could pave the way for more compact and efficient quantum communication and computing components.
Interesting. And we also have a show coming up where we recorded somebody who works at the Israeli Quantum Institute, or
That's
was it the
right.
Quantum Research Lab? Forget.
I think it's the research lab, but behind him he had a quantum computer.
He had an honest to goodness quantum computer like
Absolutely.
behind him.
That
So
was really exciting.
that was really cool to see. So here's a story I saw this week, and we were talking about it. I'm gonna see if I could share the video right here. All right. Let me know if you hear the audio.
Rendering these tricks
Yes.
obsolete due to their precision.
This is an example of something called a quantum clock, and it's a bit like an ultra-precise wristwatch. But now, if we started it ticking at the beginning of the universe, it wouldn't have lost a second by now.
So basically,
Unlike conventional
Here you go.
radar, which relies on radio waves bouncing off targets, quantum radar uses entangled photons pairs of light particles linked across distances. Even if a stealth jet absorbs or scatters most photons, the remaining entangled pairs retain information about the target's location and shape. This quantum fingerprint allows detection with unprecedented precision, bypassing traditional stealth tactics designed to minimize radar cross-sections.
so the short of it is, I mean, think about that. Is that you now have the ability to render stealth technologies that we've been relying on for decades to be effectively obsolete, right?
Right.
I'm not sure if this would fall under quantum sensing, but one of
Right.
the guys in the keynote lab had basically said something to the effect of, you know, when he did like a live poll of the audience, and like, you know, most people were interested in kind of general quantum computing, and only like 10% were into quantum sensing. He kind of said more of you should be looking into what quantum sensing can do.
Right.
And then literally like on the drive, not on the drive home, but when I got home, I saw this video
Quantum
in my
radar
feed.
can detect the tiny machines,
Right.
so they can be
That's something really interesting to talk about, to say,
Right.
even within quantum, quantum sensing is something really interesting and exciting. What I'm taking from this
Mm-hmm.
is, again, it's photonic
Mm-hmm.
qubits, right?
In
And
this example, yeah, that's another use for photonic qubits.
And so there's that. And then we were just talking about photonic qubits with the Israeli article.
That's
And
right.
when we've been talking about the race of, which qubit is going to be functional first,
Right.
right? And that there's different companies that are obviously interested in different types of qubits. It really makes you wonder about the photonic qubits.
Yeah, I mean, I think when the dust settles in the 21st century, I think photonics is probably going to win. But that's just my opinion, right? I could be wrong. Lord knows I've been wrong before. But no, I just have like a feeling, an intuition that photonics is probably going to be the winning thing. Doesn't mean other ones aren't going to be valid, but and each one of these. So one of the things that, and if you're a new listener to the show or the stream, it is relatively. It's interesting because in conventional electronics, every computer from the iPhone to the Commodore 64 you see behind me to your smartphone and your television and your refrigerator, all use electrons, right? It's literally called electronics, right? And they're all basically electrons moving or not moving inside of silicon, some kind of silicon, right? And that's something that, but with quantum computing, well, there could be multiple ways to do the compute on it, right? Like it could be photons, could be ion traps, could be cat qubits, could be like, so there's not one kind of way to rule them all, at least not yet. And maybe never, right?
That's what I want. That's what I want. I want
Mhm.
there can be leaders that
Right.
deal, like, the leader that deals with, and there's going to be several, especially with superconducting qubits.
Right.
But I don't want there to be kind of one that rules them all, because then they get to decide if research stops on other types of qubits that can be
Right.
used for, dealing with weather information or handling data, handling energy company information. You know what I mean? Handling
Well, and
bank.
each one of these, each one of these is going to have a different type of use case, right?
Yes.
But I mean, if you want to talk about, you mentioned banking, right? There already is a practical. I don't know if they've deployed it yet, but basically, J.P. Morgan Chase with their perfectly random number generator, right?
Yeah.
That's already. I don't know if how far in deployment it is, but I can't imagine it's that far off, right? There's also, I mean, you can look at it. You can look at it from an example of the early automotive industry, right? Where, you know, was it going to be? There were some electric cars, there were some steam powered cars, right? There were, ultimately it kind of collapsed to. There's electric cars, but there's also gasoline powered or diesel powered engines, right? You know, gasoline didn't replace the need for diesel. Diesel is good for some things, not for others, right? So you kind of have this. It doesn't always have to collapse to one,
Right.
you know. Sorry, I cut you off
No, that's
midstream.
okay. Something else I was thinking about that was financially related. There's been a new project called Project 11,
Mhm.
has launched at the Q Day Prize, offering 1 Bitcoin to the first team that can break a simplified version of Bitcoin's elliptic curve cryptography using a quantum computer. Well,
Interesting.
no one has a quantum computer. They have to run the simulation on it. But
Right.
this initiative underscores the looming threat quantum computing poses to current cryptographic systems, and highlights the urgency of developing a quantum resistant encryption method. So I thought that was interesting because we were talking about the financial news, and so this is something that's just come out from on CoinDesk from Bitcoin and Tom's Guide. But I think that's really something that's important to note in the financial market. But the other thing I wanted to mention is that April 14th was World Quantum Day,
Right. That's
right?
right. Mm-hmm.
Celebrating 100th anniversary of quantum mechanics. And it just shows you there were so many more events that were going on now, right? Like the conference you went to, but there were other
So
conferences.
apparently there was a hackathons. Yale University had one, and there were a few other ones. One of the guys I met in the hallways of Quantum Tech USA is that I think he was from Wisconsin, and he was on the East Coast already for the Yale Quantum Hackathon. Right? I'm like, that's so cool. So
Really exciting,
hopefully we'll get him on the show. We can kind of talk about that. But
right?
a number of universities did quantum hackathons in honor of World Quantum Day. Um, and it's interesting. There's a really good book, and I can't seem to find it. But how I came across it was I was looking up basically the different types of quantum gates that are available, right? And several of the gates are named Pauli. There's Pauli X, Y, and Z. Although for those speaking English outside the U.S., X, Y, and Z. So just in a little internationalization there. And I'm like, who is this Pauli guy? And I happened to pick up a book, and I need to find it. It was I have it on my Kindle, but it's basically kind of like all about the early days of the discovery of quantum mechanics and things like that, and all the personalities kind of at play with it, right? And Einstein was in the bunch. Einstein was actually very skeptical of it. We know about Schrodinger. We know about this, but Pauli was also very influential, and not exactly a role model. Just put that out there. He, if you watch Big Bang Theory, he's a bit like Wolowitz,
Okay.
but maybe a little more successful. Um, but it was interesting, and he didn't have the best interpersonal skills or thing. There's some funny anecdotes in there, so it kind of made it more human. But then I understood, like, oh, this is why there's so many gates named for him, right? And there's all these different, it's just interesting to see the human side of kind of the research, from 100 years ago. It kind of, I don't know. I found that book very interesting, and it helped me understand kind of a little bit more about this space. Because every time I think I got it figured out, there's a whole other level of stuff I had no idea about. you know?
Yes. Like, even if I go all the way back to the beginning,
Hmm.
I remember the first time I learned about the fact that there were different qubits,
Yeah, that was
right?
pretty crazy. Yeah.
And now, like, I totally get it. It makes sense to me.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, I understand way more than I thought I would, just by talking to these experts in their field. So, by the way, if you're an expert on quantum sensing, here's your invitation to come on and talk to us about quantum sensing. It's something that we're very interested in delving deeper into. Um, but remember, I was telling you this week, I wasn't lucky enough to go to the conference, but I was talking to a lot of speakers at the conference.
Well, and
And
you'll have your chance too, right? Like you'll have. There's one in Montreal, or is it Toronto?
there's one in Montreal and there's one in Ottawa.
Okay.
So I'm trying to go in with my press pass and represent Impact Quantum. So anybody knows anybody at the Montreal conference or the Ottawa conference, I want in. But yeah, like that's what blows my mind. When I talk to somebody, like I talked to someone today, we're going to be taping with them like the first week in May. And he was explaining to me how he's been on the academic side this whole time, teaching at a university.
Hmm.
And in the last 2 years, he's moved over to a commercial application and he made it across the chasm. And
Nice.
I think his story is really interesting because that's what we're saying basically, that more of these PhDs should get involved with, the commercial applications that are happening, because it's like it's up their alley. Like, it just makes sense for them to do it, and it makes their education also multifaceted and way more marketable.
Also,
Um,
too, like if you want to stay in academia and you want people to be excited about what you're studying, you want to be able to teach the next generation to push the boundaries, right? I think that's why people get into teaching. And there's no better time to justify spending money on a college education in advanced physics now than now. I mean,
right,
I was telling somebody a story. You know the story. My oldest is in a bunch of AP classes, and he was doing AP computer science, but he opted out of continuing the path. Um, and he's doing AP physics instead, right? And I can't be mad at that decision. Now, did I wish that he would have told mom and dad first rather than us finding out through dot? Yeah, teenage boys are going to be teenage boys, right?
right,
But but the fact that maybe that could be a viable career path. I mean, if I wanted to study physics when I was that age, my parents never would have
yeah,
gone, because it was not a real engineering discipline,
right.
right? Now I know I'm going to get a lot of hate mail for that, but that was their opinion, not mine. I just had to live under their rules.
Well, like I told you, like my dad was a physicist, a
Yep.
mathematician, a
Hmm.
statistician, and he had a PhD in physics. So, like, okay, so what do you do with that, right? Well,
Right.
IBM was smart enough to find him
Right.
and bring him in and say, we're just going to kind of set you up so you just get to think all day, right?
Exactly.
And that was a brilliant move. To understand someone like that is just conceptually putting something together that at the time in the 70s and the 80s, they just weren't ready for. Um, so now a lot of his work is being used. Uh,
Right. And and kudos for IBM and for having that type of multi-decade vision.
right?
Um, because I mean, most of this was just on a chalkboard at one time, right? Like, could this happen? You know,
Right.
Now we're in that exciting phase where it's starting to happen for real. And I think that's really where, and and I think the gatekeepers right now, I think there's two blockers for quantum computing to go quote unquote mainstream. One is the error correction, right? That's probably the biggest most obvious one, but the other one is kind of like the gatekeeping that you're seeing, right? I mean, look at the hate that Microsoft got when they did their announcement, right? Look
Right.
at the hate that Amazon got with Ocelot. Not a lot.
Enough,
Now,
enough that it kind of turned people off. And the whole idea now is about better communication. These quantum companies, they need people that know how to talk to everybody,
right, right,
and like, community folks, and people like me, who are technically literate, to be able to communicate the goodies, to the relationships that they want to develop.
right.
And there's just not enough people yet that are understanding it, or how they would fit inside of it, when they're like, I don't know how to do math, and I don't understand physics, and I don't know Python, or and that's unnecessary, because the other folks that they have, the folks that can do that, right? um, but they're not communicating the message.
Well, that
Because
was kind of our thesis, right, for the season 3 of the show was don't focus on the ecosystem, the people that have to be inspired today to be part of the ecosystem that's going to be built out tomorrow, right? And that's going to, you're going to need people who are quantum marketers like you,
Mhm,
right? You're going to need people that, can sell this, right?
mhm.
No one in their right mind, and my salespeople will back me up on this. Would you want to put someone who is an advanced, theoretical, physicist from academia? Would you want to put them in front of like a major Fortune 500 CEO?
No,
Because they're going to be speaking in different worlds. They're going to, they'll be in the
absolutely.
same room, but in different universes, so to speak.
Right.
So you're going to have salespeople that can kind of like take that, the very abstract concept of qubits and convert that into something that a business person can relate to. And it's not just, business. There's obviously implications for national security. I mean, if you watch that video further on, one of the big challenges in warfare now is the of drones, right? And drones are very tiny, so they don't. Even if you don't out, even if they're not like clad in stealth radar absorbing material, they're still radar systems are not meant to pick up something that's small, right? So how do you defend against that, right? Well, theoretically, this quad idea of a quantum radar with entangled photons going out. Um, all you have to do is you have to get some of them will share the information. Again, if you're an expert in this, I'll have you on the show. But I suspect a lot of people that are working on these systems are probably not talking about these systems.
Mhm.
I'm sure that the work that's going on here is definitely kept under wraps. But just know, like, this is going to be a very real line of revenue for startups, for existing technology companies, and things like that. And there's always going to be kind of haters and things like that. And I just don't think that's. I don't think it's. I don't think it's practical. I think, and also, while a lot of the gatekeepers who are already in the field think it's very self-serving, it's actually, I think, to their detriment, just by the nature of they're shutting out the future.
Yeah, it's not productive, it's not progressive, and it stifles innovation. And you never want to stifle innovation,
No, well, it's just not good for yourself.
right? So yeah, it's been a great, wild, and wacky week in quantum computing, and
Hmm.
putting together all the information that we've received, and the people that we're talking to, and the events that was happening. I think it was great to have a wrap up, to say
Absolutely.
what
And
happened.
it's been a wild week and a wild year
Yeah.
for this field.
Yeah.
So it would sound like the little guy is awake, so I may have to step away. But we've been talking for about 45 minutes. I think it's a pretty
Yeah.
good,
So
pretty
we
good
can cut it.
episode.
I think it's a good episode. I think if we can cut this part out where we're talking about it, you
Hmm.
can do your like, your finale.
Like Bailey and her finale and things like
Yeah.
that. So, yeah, cool. Well, if you're watching us on the live stream, just know you're among the very first in the world to hear this. And if you have no idea what we're talking about, you go to impactquantum.com, or in your favorite podcast app, you can search for Impact Quantum. Not a lot of quantum podcasts out there, but so we won't be that hard to find, at least for now.
That sounds great.
All right. Everyone out there, have a great weekend. If you celebrate Easter, have an awesome Easter. And if you celebrate Passover, have a good end of Passover.
Look forward to the pizza that you can have on
That's
Sunday
right.
night. When it's over, you wait an hour, then you get to have some pizza. So
There you go.
There you go.
Or some other breaded dessert or something like that.
Right. Exactly.
So awesome. All right, I'm going to play the outro animation, and you all, everyone out there, have a great weekend. Have a great holiday, end of holiday, whatever. And hopefully where you are, the pollen isn't too bad, because I know by me, it's really bad. All right, signing off.